By the following morning, Cody Barrett had become the most talked-about being on the Celestial Accord, and not in the way any diplomat would want. The security footage of him picking up the venomous arthropod with his bare hands had spread through every department on the ship. Crew members who had never spoken to a human before were now whispering in corridors and mess halls, trying to understand what kind of creature walks into a restricted biodome at night and carries out a lethal animal like it is a house pet. Velthari sat in his office and stared at the incident report on his screen. He had been tasked with writing a full behavioral profile on Cody for the ship's command staff, and he had been sitting there for over an hour without typing a single word. The problem was simple. Nothing Cody did fit into any known behavioral framework. He was not aggressive because he showed no hostility. He was not reckless in the traditional sense because he seemed fully aware of what he was doing. He was not stupid because his xenobiology scores were among the highest in the human delegation. He was simply something Velthari had no category for. A person who did not seem to understand danger the way other beings did, or who understood it and simply did not care. He typed one line into the report and then deleted it. The line had read, "I do not know what is wrong with this human." Meanwhile, the ship was preparing for its annual cultural exchange dinner, a formal event in which each species presented a traditional dish from their homeworld. It was meant to build mutual respect and understanding between the delegations. The other human students had spent days coordinating their contributions. Katie Morgan had arranged a carefully selected menu of dishes chosen for their mild flavors and visual appeal. Danny Hoffman had prepared a presentation on the cultural significance of bread in human history, complete with slides. Cody had made Vegemite on toast and a tray of lamingtons. He had spent an hour in the ship's synthesizer bay, arguing with the food fabrication system until it produced something close enough to what he wanted. The lamingtons were slightly lopsided, and the Vegemite had a faintly purple tint that suggested the synthesizer had substituted at least one ingredient. But Cody declared them close enough and carried them proudly to the banquet hall. The dinner began with great ceremony. Each delegation presented their dishes in turn. The Krithons offered a crystallized nectar that shimmered like liquid glass. The Movari contributed a nutrient broth that changed flavor depending on the consumer's mood. The Droshek brought slabs of flame-seared meat that still smoked on the plate, and the entire room gave them a wide berth. When it was Cody's turn, he walked to the front of the hall, carrying his tray, and set it down with a proud smile. "Right," he said. "So this is Vegemite on toast. It's basically the national food of Australia. You just spread it on and have a go." The aliens approached cautiously. A Krithan officer took a small bite of the toast and immediately set it down. His antenna folded flat against his head, which was a sign of deep sensory distress. A Mulvari delegate absorbed a small portion through its membrane and turned a violent shade of orange, which Velthari later confirmed was the Mulvari equivalent of gagging. The worst reaction came from a Plavan diplomat, a species known across the galaxy for having the most refined palate of any known life form. The Plavan could detect individual molecules of flavor with a single taste. He took one small lick of the Vegemite, went completely rigid, and collapsed sideways off his chair. Two attendants rushed to his side. He was conscious, but unable to speak for several minutes. Cody watched all of this with total confusion. "You lot are spreading it too thick," he said. "You only need a thin layer, like really thin." No one tried the lamingtons. They were too afraid. Katie pulled Cody aside after the dinner. "You just hospitalized a Plavan," she said. "He's fine," Cody said. "He's just dramatic." "Cody, the Plavan are one of the most respected species in the Union. Their ambassador is going to hear about this." Cody shrugged. Maybe the ambassador's got a stronger stomach. Katie walked away, and Danny, who had been standing nearby, quietly picked up one of the lamingtons and took a bite. It was actually quite good. In the days that followed, the ship's social dynamics began to shift in ways no one had predicted. Cody, unbothered by the Vegemite incident, continued to move through the ship like he owned it. He ate meals in different sections of the mess hall every day, sitting with whichever species had an open seat. He asked questions that no trained diplomat would ever ask, questions that were blunt and sometimes awkward, but always genuine. He asked a Drashek warrior what it felt like to shed their armor plates. He asked a Saluvan scholar whether their bioluminescent patterns ever embarrassed them, like blushing. He asked a Krython engineer whether they dreamed. Some of these questions were met with silence, some were met with confusion, but slowly, some of them were met with answers. Real answers, not the rehearsed diplomatic responses that species usually gave to outsiders, but honest, personal answers. Cody had a quality that no protocol could teach. He made people feel like he was actually interested in them, because he was. This was how he ended up sitting between the two most powerful and hostile delegations on the ship. The Drashek and the Selavan had been locked in a bitter dispute over territorial mining rights in a contested nebula for decades. The conflict had nearly escalated to open war twice. On the Celestial Accord, the two groups avoided each other entirely. They sat on opposite sides of every room. They never spoke except through intermediaries. The diplomatic instructors had been trying to arrange a mediation session for weeks, and both sides had refused. Cody did not know any of this. He sat down between the Drashek commander Gorath and the Selavan representative Ilwen during a routine lunch, because those were the only open seats. He talked to Gorath about physical competition. The Drashek were a warrior culture, and Gorath's eyes, all 6 of them, lit up when Cody described something called rugby, and the concept of voluntarily tackling other humans at full speed for fun. "You do this without armor?" Gorath asked, leaning forward. "Yeah, mate," Cody said. "Armor's for soft people." Gorath made a low rumbling sound that shook the table. It took Cody a moment to realize the Drashek was laughing. Then Cody turned to Ilwen and said, completely without guile, "I've been meaning to tell you, the way your skin lights up when you talk is honestly one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen." Ilwen, who had been sitting in rigid silence, flickered. A wave of soft blue light passed over their entire body. In Saluvan culture, this was an expression of genuine surprise and warmth, something they rarely showed to outsiders. Ilwen said nothing for several seconds. "No one from outside our species has ever said that to us." For a brief moment, the 3 of them just sat there, eating lunch like it was the most normal thing in the world. Gorath and Ilwen did not speak to each other, but they did not leave either. It was the closest the 2 species had been in a shared space without hostility in years. Katie watched from across the room. She wanted to be angry. She wanted to say that Cody had no idea what he was doing, and that his carelessness would cause an incident. But something in the way Gorath had laughed, and the way Ilwen had glowed, made her hesitate. Danny, sitting beside her, said quietly, "I think he might actually be good at this." Katie shook her head. "He has no idea what he's doing." "Maybe that's why it works," Danny said. The part ended 2 days later, when a Drashek warrior named Thrag approached Cody in the training hall and issued a formal challenge to ritual combat. It was considered one of the highest honors in Drashek culture, offered only to those they considered worthy opponents. It had also left several previous challengers in the medical bay with broken bones and ruptured organs. Cody looked up at the 8-foot reptilian warrior towering over him, grinned, and said, "Yeah, all right, sounds fun." Katie, standing 10 feet away, put her face in her hands. The arena aboard the Celestial Accord had not been used for a ritual sparring match in over 2 cycles. It was a circular chamber with a sand-covered floor and tiered seating that rose steeply on all sides. The walls were lined with old Drashek banners, their symbols faded from centuries of display. The room could hold a few hundred spectators. On the day of the fight, every seat was filled, and dozens more watched from the corridor through the open doors. Word had spread fast. A human, the one from the biodome footage, the one who ate the toxic paste and called the Droshek big lads, had accepted a ritual sparring challenge from Throg. Throg was not the largest Droshek on the ship, but he was widely considered the fastest, and in a species built like armored tanks, speed was what made someone dangerous. He had competed in 11 ritual matches over his career, and won every single one. 3 of his opponents had required reconstructive surgery. Cody walked into the arena in his cargo shorts and bare feet. A murmur ran through the crowd. Several Krython officers exchanged glances. A Seluvan diplomat near the top of the stands dimmed their light output entirely, which was the Seluvan equivalent of covering their eyes. Danny Hoffman sat in the third row, clutching his tablet so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Katie Morgan stood near the entrance with her arms crossed and a look on her face that could have frozen a star. Throg entered from the opposite side. He was enormous. His bone-plated armor gleamed under the arena lights, and his clawed feet dug into the sand with each step. He carried no weapons, because Droshek ritual combat was fought with the body alone, which was more than enough. He performed the traditional war display, a sequence of strikes and roars meant to intimidate the opponent before the match began. The sound shook the walls. Sand vibrated on the floor. Cody watched with his hands on his hips, nodding slowly, like he was watching someone demonstrate a new lawnmower. The signal was given, and the match began. Thrag moved first. He covered the distance between them in 2 strides, his right arm swinging in a wide arc that could have taken Cody's head clean off. Cody ducked. Not gracefully, not like a trained fighter in a film, but with a loose, instinctive drop that took him just below the arc of the blow. The air above him snapped with the force of it. He rolled sideways and came up on his feet, already moving. Thrag turned and charged again, faster this time. Cody did not try to block, because blocking a Droshek with bare arms would be like trying to stop a truck with a pool noodle. Instead, he sidestepped and let Thrag's momentum carry the warrior past him. As Throg went by, Cody slapped him on the back of the shoulder. "Quick one, aren't you?" Cody said. Throg stopped and turned slowly. His 6 eyes narrowed. In Droshek culture, being touched during combat without being struck was considered mocking. The crowd went silent. Throg came in lower this time, arms wide, trying to grab Cody in a hold that would end the match instantly. Cody backpedaled, using his smaller size to stay just out of reach. He moved with a strange, unpredictable rhythm, shifting his weight from foot to foot, changing direction without warning. It was not any fighting style the Droshek had studied. It was the movement of someone who had grown up dodging angry animals, bar brawlers, and his older brother on a cattle property in the outback. For 5 minutes, the match continued like this. Throg would attack, and Cody would slip away. Not by much, sometimes by inches, but always just enough. He took a glancing hit to the ribs that sent him stumbling sideways. He took another to the shoulder that spun him around. Each time, the crowd tensed, expecting him to fall. Each time, he found his feet and kept moving. 10 minutes in, Thrag connected with a full strike to Cody's midsection. The sound was awful, a heavy, meaty impact that echoed through the arena. Cody went down hard, sliding across the sand on his back. Danny half stood from his seat. Katie gripped the doorframe. A Malvari spectator turned a shade of gray that indicated it believed it was witnessing a death. Cody lay on his back for a few seconds. Then he coughed, rolled onto his side, and pushed himself up. He wiped sand off his face, spat to the side, and looked at Thrag with that same grin. "Good one, mate," he said. The arena was completely silent. 15 minutes. Cody was slower now. There was blood on his lip, and he favored his left side, where the ribs had taken damage. But he was still standing, still moving, still refusing to stop. Thrag, for the first time in the match, was breathing hard. Not because Cody had hurt him, because he had not, but because chasing a target that would not stay still and would not stay down was exhausting in a way the Droshek warrior had never experienced. At the 18-minute mark, Thrag caught Cody with a sweeping leg strike that took his feet out from under him. Cody hit the ground flat on his back, and this time the impact drove the air from his lungs. He lay there, chest heaving, staring up at the arena ceiling. Everyone waited for him to stay down. Cody closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. He planted one hand in the sand and pushed. His arm shook, his body shook, but he stood up. He spat blood to the side, squared his shoulders, and raised his fists. "All right," he said, his voice rough. "My turn." He was not strong enough to truly hurt a Droshek. But he came forward, and that was something no one had expected. He threw 2 quick strikes to Thrag's midsection, aiming for the gaps between the armor plates. And one of them actually connected. Thrag grunted. It was not pain exactly, but it was surprise, and in Droshek combat, surprise from a smaller opponent carried weight. The fight lasted 3 more minutes. Cody landed 2 more hits and took another heavy blow that dropped him to one knee. He got up again. He always got up. At the 21-minute mark, Thrag stepped back. He straightened to his full height, looked down at Cody, and raised one clawed hand, palm outward. The crowd gasped. It was the Droshek signal for a conceded draw. A draw. In over 200 years of recorded Droshek ritual combat aboard Union vessels, there had never been a draw. Thrag stepped forward and grasped Cody's forearm in the traditional warrior grip. His voice was deep and carried to every corner of the arena. "You do not break," he said. "I have fought opponents twice your size who fell in half the time. You are small, and you are soft, and you do not break." He pulled Cody's arm upward and announced him as a warrior friend, a bond that in Droshek culture was considered unbreakable and sacred. The Droshek in the stands rose to their feet and struck their fists against their chest plates in unison. The sound was like thunder. Cody, swaying slightly on his feet, said, "Cheers, mate. That was a good scrap." The aftermath was immediate and dramatic. The Droshek began treating Cody with visible respect, greeting him in corridors with the warrior nod, saving him a seat in the mess hall, referring to him by a Droshek title that roughly translated to "the one who does not fall." Other species took notice. If the Droshek, who respected almost no one outside their own kind, honored this human, then perhaps there was something about humans worth paying attention to. Velthari filed his formal complaint that evening, recommending Cody's removal from the program for protocol violations. He submitted it with a sense of grim duty, believing it was the right thing to do. Katie found Cody at his quarters that night. He was sitting on the edge of his bunk, pressing a makeshift ice pack against his ribs. He had fashioned it from a coolant cell wrapped in a towel. He looked tired and sore and completely at peace. "You could have died," Katie said from the doorway. "Nah," Cody said. "He wasn't trying to kill me. He was testing me." "How could you possibly know that?" Cody looked at her and shrugged, then winced because shrugging hurt. Same way you know when a dog's playing rough versus actually biting. You just feel it. Katie stood there for a long moment, trying to find words. Finally she said, "You are the most impossible person I have ever met." Cody grinned. "Thanks, Katie." She turned and left. Behind her, she heard him humming the same song he had hummed in the biodome, and she realized against every instinct she had, that she was starting to believe he might actually know what he was doing. The alarm tore through the celestial accord at 3 in the morning, ship time. It was not the soft chime of a drill or a system advisory. It was the deep, repeating pulse, and every species on board had been trained to recognize and pray they would never hear. It meant the ship was under attack. Cody was awake before the second pulse. He had always been a light sleeper, a habit earned from years of living in a house where possums got into the roof at night and made enough noise to wake the dead. He swung his legs off the bunk, jammed his feet into his flip-flops, and was in the corridor within seconds. The hallway was chaos. Krython officers were rushing past in organized lines, their antennae flat with stress. A group of Celavan scholars hurried toward the secure chambers, their skin flickering in patterns of sharp white fear. Somewhere below, a deep metallic groaning sound echoed through the hull. The engines had stopped. Cody grabbed a passing Krython officer by the arm. "What's happening?" The officer stared at him with wide, compound eyes. "Vrelic, pirates, they have disabled our engines and are boarding through the lower decks." Cody had heard of the Vrelic during his xenobiology classes. They were a predatory species that operated in the lawless regions between Union territories. They were known for 3 things: speed, cruelty, and a biological weapon system that allowed them to produce and deploy chemical toxins from glands in their bodies. They did not negotiate. They took what they wanted and left whatever was still alive behind. "Right," Cody said. "Where are the others?" He found Katie and Danny in the residential section. Katie was already dressed in her uniform and helping organize the other human students. Danny was pale but alert, his tablet clutched to his chest. There were 6 other humans in the delegation, all of them scared and looking to Katie for direction. "The Vrelic are pumping some kind of gas through the ventilation in the lower decks," Katie said. "It's a sedation toxin. The Krythons and Mulvari are going down fast. Even the Drashek are affected." "But we're not," Danny said. He looked at his tablet, where he had been scanning the ship's internal chemical sensors. "Human biochemistry is different enough that the toxin barely registers for us. Mild nausea, at worst." Cody looked at him. "So we're the only ones still standing?" "On the lower decks, yes. The upper decks haven't been hit yet, but the Vrelic are working their way up. If they reach the bridge, they'll take the ship's data cores, and every delegate on board becomes a hostage." Cody was quiet for a moment, which was unusual enough that both Katie and Danny noticed. Then he cracked his knuckles, rolled his neck, and said, "All right, here's what we're going to do." What followed was not a military plan in any formal sense. Cody had never received combat training. He had never taken a course in tactics. But he had grown up in a place where things went wrong regularly, where storms knocked out power for days, where snakes got into the shed, where you fixed problems with whatever was at hand because help was hours away. He thought in practical terms, and right now, the practical situation was clear. The crew was being gassed. The aliens could not fight it. The humans could. He split the group into 3 teams. Katie would take 2 students and make her way to the communications array. The Vrelic had deployed a signal jammer that was blocking all outgoing transmissions. If Katie could find a way to reroute the internal communication system, she could coordinate with any Drashek warriors on the upper decks who were still conscious, and get a distress signal out to the Union patrol fleet. Danny would take 1 student and head to the engineering section. His job was to find the signal jammer and disable it. Danny protested that he was not an engineer, but Cody pointed out that he had spent the last 3 weeks studying alien electronics for fun, which made him the most qualified person in the room. Cody himself would take the remaining students and head directly for the bridge, where the main Vrelic boarding party was setting up operations. "What are you going to fight them with?" Katie asked. Cody looked around the corridor. He found a maintenance locker, broke it open, and pulled out a metal pipe about 3 feet long. Then, he found a fire suppression canister mounted on the wall, a high-pressure unit designed to extinguish chemical fires. He tested the trigger. A jet of dense white foam shot out with enough force to knock a datapad off a shelf 10 feet away. "This'll do," he said. "There are plasma weapons in the armory," Katie said. Cody shook his head. "Never used one. I'd probably blow a hole in the wall. I know how a pipe works." Katie stared at him. Danny stared at him. The other students stared at him. Then Katie nodded, and they moved. The next 40 minutes were the longest and most intense of any of their lives. Katie and her team moved through the upper decks, staying low and quiet. They found the communication hub locked down, but intact. The Vrelic had not bothered to secure it, because they assumed the sedation toxin would keep everyone unconscious. Katie worked through the system with steady hands, rerouting internal channels to reach the Drashek quarters on the upper deck. She found Gorath, the Drashek commander, still conscious and furious. The toxin had affected his warriors, but the upper deck ventilation had not been fully compromised. Gorath had 11 warriors still on their feet. "Tell me where to go," Gorath said through the comm. Katie gave him coordinates. Danny reached the engineering section and found the signal jammer bolted to a bulkhead near the main power conduit. It was Vrelic technology, alien and unfamiliar, but the basic principles of signal disruption were universal. He worked for 20 minutes, pulling panels, tracing circuits, and muttering to himself, while his teammates stood guard at the door with a wrench. When he finally cut the right connection, the jammer went dark, and the ship's communication array came back online. The distress signal went out immediately, broadcasting on all Union emergency channels. Cody reached the bridge corridor and found 4 Vrelic soldiers guarding the main entrance. The Vrelic were fast and lean, covered in dark chitinous plating, with long arms that ended in sharp, hooked claws. Their eyes glowed a dull red in the dim emergency lighting. Cody did not hesitate. He came around the corner at full speed, aimed the fire suppression canister, and hit the trigger. The blast of white foam caught the first 2 Vrelic directly in the face. They stumbled backward, blinded, clawing at the thick chemical foam that clogged their breathing slits. Cody swung the pipe into the third one's midsection before it could react. The Vrelic doubled over, and Cody hit it again across the back. The 4th Vrelic lunged at him with its claws extended. Cody twisted sideways, not fast enough to avoid it completely. One claw caught his left arm and tore through skin and muscle. The pain was immediate and sharp, but Cody had been kicked by a horse when he was 14, and that had hurt worse. He brought the pipe around in a tight arc and caught the Vrelic across the jaw. It went down. More Vrelic were coming from inside the bridge. Cody stood in the doorway, bleeding, holding a pipe in one hand and an almost empty foam canister in the other. And he did what no Vrelic tactical manual had ever accounted for. He started yelling. He yelled things that no translation system in the galaxy could properly interpret. He yelled in a stream of Australian slang so thick and so fast that the Vrelic combat recorders later logged it as unknown vocal weapon, psychological classification. He yelled because it felt right, and because in his experience, being loud and angry made you seem bigger than you were. Gorath and his Drashek warriors hit the bridge from the secondary entrance 30 seconds later. 11 armored reptilian warriors poured into the room with the focused fury of a species that had been denied a fight and was very eager to make up for it. The Vrelic did not stand a chance. The bridge was secured in under 4 minutes. Cody slid down the wall and sat on the floor, holding his bleeding arm, while Drashek warriors stepped over unconscious Vrelic around him. Gorath walked over and looked down at him. "You held the door," he said. "Someone had to," Cody said. The Union patrol fleet arrived 20 minutes later. The Vrelic, now cut off and outnumbered, attempted to retreat to their ship. 3 of their soldiers had to be carried because Cody had disabled them so thoroughly they could not walk. The Celestial Accord was saved. 12 crew members were injured. None were killed. The humans, every single one of them, had performed beyond anything the crew had imagined possible. And at the center of it all, sitting on the floor of the bridge with a torn arm and a dented pipe across his lap, was a young man in cargo shorts who had never once in his life followed a protocol. The Celestial Accord limped into the Union starbase at Valon 4 with one engine running, a cracked hull plate, and a story that was already spreading faster than light. By the time the ship docked, every major news network in the Galactic Union had picked up the report. A training vessel carrying diplomatic students had been attacked by relic pirates. The crew had been sedated with chemical weapons, and a handful of human exchange students, a species that had only joined the Union months ago, had fought back and won. The details were what made the story impossible to ignore. A human had held a bridge corridor alone with a metal pipe. Another had disabled a relic signal jammer with spare parts and self-taught electronics knowledge. A third had coordinated an alien counterattack through a jury-rigged communication network. And none of them had used a single weapon from the armory, because, according to the one in charge, they were too fiddly. The debriefing was held in a formal hall at the starbase, attended by Union officials, military commanders, and representatives from every species that had students aboard the Celestial Accord. Cody sat in the front row, with his left arm wrapped in a medical brace. The Drashek healers aboard the ship had treated the wound, and they had been visibly impressed that Cody had continued fighting after receiving it. The Drashek word they used to describe his behavior translated roughly to too stubborn to understand he was injured. Velthari was called to the podium first. The Krython stood tall and rigid, his antenna perfectly still, which for a Krython indicated extreme internal conflict. He had been asked to provide an official assessment of Cody Barrett's conduct during the crisis. He stood in silence for several seconds. The room waited. "I filed a formal recommendation to have this human removed from the program," Velthari said. "I believed he was a threat to order and a disruption to the mission. I wish to formally withdraw that recommendation." He paused again, and when he spoke next, his voice was quieter, but carried to every corner of the room. "He is the most frustrating, illogical, and effective individual I have encountered in 40 cycles of service. I do not fully understand how he operates. I do not believe he fully understands how he operates. But when this ship was in danger, and every protocol we had failed, he did not hesitate. He acted. And because he acted, we are all alive." Velthari stepped down from the podium and walked past Cody without looking at him. But as he passed, one of his antennae brushed Cody's shoulder, and Cody, who had spent enough time around Krythons by now to know what that meant, smiled. The Drashek ceremony came next, and it was something the hall had never seen before. Commander Gorath formally petitioned the Union Council to grant Cody honorary warrior status within the Drashek hierarchy. The petition was approved unanimously. In over 800 years of recorded Drashek tradition, no non-Drashek had ever received the title. The ceremony was solemn and ancient. Drashek warriors lined both sides of the aisle, their armor polished, their posture rigid. Gorath stood at the end, holding a length of blackened metal chain, the symbol of the warrior bond. He spoke in the Drashek language, his deep voice rolling through the hall like distant thunder, and every Drashek present struck their chest plates in rhythm. Cody walked down the aisle to receive the chain. Katie had managed to get him into a clean shirt for the occasion, a plain white button-up that he had rolled to the elbows, but the shorts were non-negotiable. Several Union officials looked uncomfortable. The Drashek did not seem to mind. They had seen what he could do in those shorts. Gorath placed the chain around Cody's neck and gripped his forearm. "You are one of us now," he said. "Wherever you go, you carry the fire of the Drashek with you." Cody looked up at him, and for once, he did not make a joke. "I'll carry it well," he said. Gorath nodded once, and the hall erupted in the thunderous sound of Droshek warriors striking their armor. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects of the Celestial Accord incident spread across the Union. Ilwen, the Celavan representative, published an academic paper that became the most widely read document in 3 Union academies within a month. The paper was titled, "On the Paradox of Human Resilience, a Case Study in Irrational Effectiveness." In it, Ilwen analyzed human behavior through the lens of Celavan psychology and concluded that humans possessed a trait no other known species shared in the same way: the ability to function at peak effectiveness precisely when logic dictated they should collapse. Ilwen called it the refusal instinct and argued that it was not bravery in the traditional sense, but something deeper, a fundamental inability to accept defeat as a final state. The paper ended with a line that was quoted across the galaxy for years afterward. "Do not mistake their softness for weakness. They are not fragile, they are flexible, and what is flexible does not break." Danny Hoffman was offered a position in the Union's Strategic Communications Division based on his performance during the crisis. During his intake interview, the Krython recruiter asked him how he had known how to disable relic technology when he had never encountered it before. Danny said, "I watched someone pick up a deadly animal with his bare hands during his first week on the ship. After that, trying new things didn't seem so scary." Katie Morgan was promoted to lead liaison for all future human exchange delegations. She was given a staff, a budget, and the authority to shape how humanity presented itself to the Union going forward. When asked what approach she planned to take, she said, "Structured, professional, and prepared." Then, after a pause, she added, "But I'm going to make sure there's always room for the ones who don't fit the mold. Sometimes they're the ones who matter most." As for Cody, he was offered 12 different positions across the galaxy. The Drossek wanted him as a combat instructor. The Celavan wanted him as a cultural liaison. The Union's Security Council wanted him for a rapid response team. A Molvari trade consortium offered him an ambassador role, though no one could quite explain why. Even Velthari, in a private moment, suggested that Cody might consider a career in crisis management, then immediately looked like he regretted saying it. Cody turned them all down. When asked what he wanted to do, he scratched the back of his neck, looked out the window at the stars, and said, "I promised my mom I'd be home for Christmas, and I really miss my dog." He shipped out on the next transport back to Earth. The story should have ended there, but it did not, because stories about people like Cody Barrett never end where you expect them to. Months later, at the Union's annual diplomatic summit on the capital world of Thessar Prime, a young Krythan diplomat was preparing to receive a new batch of human delegates. Humans were still relatively unknown in the galaxy, and the stories she had heard seemed exaggerated. An older Krython colleague approached her. He had served aboard the Celestial Accord, though he did not mention this right away. He watched the young diplomat fidget, and then spoke. "Be cautious with the humans," he said. "They are deceptively resilient. They are aggressively friendly, and one of them once defeated a relic boarding party with a metal pipe and what I can only describe as sheer audacity." The young diplomat's antennae perked up. "Which one?" she asked. The older colleague's mandibles twitched, which was the Krython equivalent of a smile. "The one in the shorts." Far away on a dusty red road outside Broken Hill, Australia, Cody Barrett threw a tennis ball across the flat sunburned landscape and watched his dog, a scruffy blue heeler named Chips, tear after it with boundless enthusiasm. The sky above was enormous and empty. The same sky he had looked at his whole life, and he breathed it in like he had been holding his breath for months. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and glanced at the screen. It was a message from the Galactic Union, marked urgent. He read the first line, something about a new assignment and the future of human-alien relations. He looked at it for a moment, looked at Chips running back with the ball, and looked at the wide-open sky. "Yeah, nah," he said, and put the phone back in his pocket. Chips dropped the ball at his feet, tail wagging, and Cody picked it up and threw it again. The ball sailed out across the red dust, and the dog raced after it, and somewhere out among the stars, an entire galaxy was still trying to figure out what had hit them. The shuttle docked with a soft hiss, and the airlock slid open to reveal the interior of the Celestial Accord, the most prestigious diplomatic training vessel in the entire Galactic Union. Hundreds of species had walked its corridors over the centuries, learning the delicate art of interstellar negotiation. Everything about the ship was designed for order, precision, and calm. Then Cody Barrett stepped off the shuttle. He was 22 years old, lean and sun-darkened from growing up in the red dust country outside Broken Hill, Australia. He wore cargo shorts that stopped just below his knees, a pair of rubber flip-flops that slapped against the polished floor with every step, and a faded green shirt with a cartoon kangaroo printed across the chest. He had a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and a grin on his face that suggested he had never once in his life worried about making a first impression. "G'day, legends," he said to the welcoming party, his voice carrying down the corridor like a foghorn. Liaison Director Velthari, who stood at the front of the receiving delegation, felt two of his four antennae twitch involuntarily. Velthari was a Krython, a tall insectoid species known throughout the galaxy for their discipline, their love of protocol, and their extremely sensitive hearing. He had supervised the arrival of over 300 exchange students from dozens of worlds over the course of his career. He had never heard anyone be that loud within the first 2 seconds of boarding. The other human students filed out behind Cody, in neat order. Katie Morgan, a composed young woman from Virginia, with her hair pulled back and her uniform pressed, gave Velthari a respectful nod. Danny Hoffman, a thin and nervous young man from Ohio, who clutched a data tablet like a lifeline, offered a quiet hello. They looked like proper delegates. They looked like they understood where they were. Cody looked like he had wandered into the wrong building and decided to stay anyway. Velthari consulted his datapad and confirmed with a sinking feeling that he had been assigned as Cody's personal orientation supervisor. He stepped forward and introduced himself, extending one long segmented arm in what he had learned was the human greeting gesture. Cody grabbed his hand and shook it with an enthusiasm that rattled Velthari's exoskeleton. "Pleasure to meet you, mate." "Velthari, yeah? That's a bit of a mouthful. Mind if I call you Vel?" Velthari did mind. He minded very much. But before he could say so, Cody had already moved on. He spotted a Molvari delegate standing nearby, a being that resembled a large column of translucent green gel, and walked straight up to it with his hand outstretched. "How's it going, mate?" Cody said. The Molvari had no hands. It had no arms. It communicated through subtle shifts in its internal coloring. It turned a shade of confused violet as Cody stood there with his hand out, waiting. "They do not shake hands," Velthari said flatly. Cody looked at his own hand, then back at the Molvari. "Fair enough," he said, and gave it a thumbs up instead. The Molvari turned a deeper shade of violet, which Velthari later learned was the Molvari equivalent of amusement. Over the next several hours, Velthari led Cody through the standard orientation process, and every single step of it was a struggle. Cody refused to wear the standard issue uniform, claiming the fabric made him itchy in places he could not mention in polite company. He shortened every species name into a nickname without asking permission. The Krythons became Kryths. The Molvari became Mollies. The towering reptilian Drashek, an 8-foot warrior species covered in natural bone armor, became Big Lads. A Drashek guard overheard this and stared at Cody with an expression that could have been anger or bewilderment. It was difficult to tell with Drashek. Katie Morgan found Cody in the mess hall that evening, sitting at a table surrounded by aliens who all looked vaguely uncomfortable. He was trying to explain the rules of cricket to a Celavan, a small and fragile bioluminescent species that communicated partly through light patterns on their skin. The Celavan's entire body was flickering in what appeared to be distress. "Cody," Katie said, sitting down across from him, "you need to tone it down." "Tone what down?" he asked, genuinely confused. "Everything. The nicknames, the clothes, the volume. This is the most important diplomatic program humanity has ever been part of. If we mess this up, they could revoke our membership." Cody leaned back in his chair and scratched the back of his neck. "Relax, Katie. They're all good. Bit stiff maybe, but they'll warm up." Katie stared at him for a long moment, then got up and left without another word. Danny Hoffman, who had been watching from 2 tables away, quietly made a note on his tablet. Subject appears immune to social pressure. Later that night, after the ship's artificial lights had dimmed to simulate evening, Cody went for a walk. He was not supposed to leave the residential section after hours. He did not know this because he had not read the orientation manual. And he had not read the orientation manual because, in his words, it was 200 pages long and life is short. He wandered through several corridors, past laboratories and storage bays, until he reached a biodome on the lower deck. The door was sealed with a warning label in 6 languages. Cody could not read any of them. The door was also slightly ajar, which he took as an invitation. Inside, the biodome was a dense tangle of alien vegetation, humid and warm, and buzzing with small creatures. Cody felt right at home. He walked through the undergrowth, hands in his pockets, looking around with casual interest, until something fast and dark skittered across the path in front of him. He stopped. The creature stopped too. It was about the size of a dinner plate, flat-bodied, with 8 jointed legs and 2 hooked fangs that dripped with something that glowed faintly green. The ship's security team had been trying to capture this thing for 3 weeks. It was a venomous arthropod from a quarantined world, and it had escaped containment during a supply transfer. 2 Krithan officers had been hospitalized after attempting to catch it. Cody looked at it. It looked at him. "Oh, you're a big fella," he said softly. "You look just like a huntsman back home. Bit spicier, maybe." He crouched down slowly, reached out with one bare hand, and picked it up. The creature's legs curled inward for a moment, then relaxed. Cody held it gently but firmly, the way someone might hold a large spider they found behind a couch, which in fact was something he had done many times before. He carried it out of the biodome, humming a song to himself, and walked all the way to the containment lab. The 2 security officers on duty stared at him. The other made a sound that Cody would later learn was the Krithan equivalent of a scream. "Where do you want him?" Cody asked, holding up the creature. They pointed, speechless, to a reinforced glass tank. Cody placed the arthropod inside, dusted off his hands, and said, "No worries, he just wanted a bit of a walk." He strolled back to his quarters, completely unaware that the security footage of that moment would be viewed over 4,000 times by the ship's crew before morning.